Welcome to the Yong Heng Hot Rod Shop.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Yong Heng Hot Rod Shop. I'm here with our co-star, the lovely Wong Wei. And what we're going to do today is we're going to take some really cool FLIR images. For those who don't know what FLIR is forward-looking infrared, and it is an imaging technology that is, the cost has really come down on that, and it's such a cool way to be able to look at a bunch of temperatures at once. So the image is going to be colored to show us where our hot spots are and actually assign a value to those regions in the imaging. So I'm excited to bring that to the Yong Heng, and we're going to take a look at an idea that one of my viewers wrote into me about. This is not my idea. I can't take credit for it. This was one of my genius subscribers to the Yong Heng Hot Rod Shop. His suggestion was, a lot of folks run into issues with the temperature that these stainless steel tubes get to while the compressor's running. The longer it's running, the more heat they build up. But what we're going to do, his suggestion was to take a piece of copper tubing and bend it so that it can sit on here, and then use copper wire, soft copper wire, to wrap tightly to join that cooling tube to this stainless tube. And what we're going to do is take this same cooling water that's currently going through our cooling system, and we're going to add a loop and run it through that whole system. So the water is going to come in through the head and exit like it would normally, so we're not really affecting that much. But when it exits, we're going to route it across this copper tube and see how far we can cool down these stainless tubes. Now, is that going to give us more or less water in the end product? I don't really know. I would imagine that it's going to cause that air to condense, and maybe we get more air out of the bleeder here. I don't know. But I do know this. If we can cool these tubes down a bit, it might mean a few less scalded forearms, because I have done it on these before. Now, your compressor is going to be a little bit different, but adapting this technique to any high pressure air compressor like this is going to be super easy. Doesn't matter whether it's a clone, a real Yong Heng, it doesn't matter. But we're going to look at we're going to see how much heat we can get out of here. So we're going to take some images before. We're going to do a 3000 psi to 4500 psi fill on an 88 cubic foot bottle. I know everybody's rolling their eyes. Oh, it's not meant to pump that big of a tank. I use my Yong Hengs all the time to fill my bottles. My clone lasted 3.5, 4 years. So this girl is going to get no free ride. And I've got some exciting stuff coming up for a future episode. Some of you have already seen the digital Yong Heng. She's tucked away right now. She's taking a little vacation, but she's going to earn her keep around here. I've got a very, very nice contactor that we are going to look at grafting to that electrical system to take the load off that little relay that I pointed out in that video. So that's going to be an upcoming episode. I'm super excited about that. But for now, let's take a look at some FLIR images of the Yong Heng while it's doing a 3000 to 4500 psi fill up on my 88 cubic foot bottle. I'm not going to worry about showing you the other temperatures. We've seen them enough so far. I just want to watch. I'm going to put a camera in the bottle, and I'm going to take some infrared images of this setup while it's running. So bear with me. Let's go ahead and get the cooling system rocking and rolling. And let's see what this hot rod has got under the hood. In the thermal images coming up, you're going to see yellow to purple. And yellow is god-awful hot, and purple is really, really cool, purple or blue. And you can tell that that cylinder, the cast iron cylinder, is definitely the next hot spot on this system. I mean, those tubes are no joke either, but they're not as hot as that cast iron cylinder is. And I think maybe getting some water cooling on there might actually help these systems survive a little longer as well. While that compressor's cooling down, one of the first things we're going to do is create a slightly smaller spool of soft copper wire so that we can work it around those two pipes to clamp them together and also increase the copper contact to the stainless steel. I'm just wrapping this around 3 fingers, not very tight. I just want to get a bunch of it in this wad so I can pass it around those 2 tubes as I wrap it and tighten it up. I think that ought to do it. Probably more than we need. So here we have our tubing that we're going to graft onto the stainless. As you can see, my stainless is not very straight, but I think once we start wrapping it, it's really not going to matter. There's going to be enough copper contact there that this will eventually bend and conform to the stainless. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple of tie wraps down on this end just to hold it in place while I start wrapping up here. And we'll just keep wrapping it around, really simple, and then maybe touch a little solder on the end so it doesn't come undone. Turned off that cooling system. It's down much closer to ambient now, so I don't think we need it. Once again, these wire ties are only assembly aids. I would not recommend leaving them in place after you get the copper wrap done. Just, they're not rated for, although the temperatures really weren't that bad according to the thermal imaging. So what I did find was particularly interesting was how high the temperature was on this cast iron. A couple of loops of copper around there might actually be more worthwhile, and we might take a look at that in the future. But for right now, we're going to get this wrap started. Might have gone a little bit big with this initial spool, but I was so afraid of running out. It's terrible when it's not long enough. But as you can see, this is probably going to take me a while. So we'll come back when I've made some more progress. All right, truth be told, viewers, it is really a nightmare trying to wrap this in situ. There's just not enough room in here to work. It might be different if this was one of the more elaborate Yong Hengs that has the tube coming across here and the other one crossing back. There might be more space, but I think I'm going to do something I really didn't want to do, which is to loosen these fittings, take this tube off, and do this wrap on the bench. I just think it's going to go a lot faster and it's going to come out a lot better. And then when I get it all wrapped, we'll touch some solder in a couple of places. I don't want to put a lot on there. I want to be able to take this off if I want to later. But I think getting it off of here is a better investment of my time and risking having these fittings leak. One of the issues that Yong Hengs have, if you repeatedly loosen and tighten these fittings, eventually that knurl in the that makes the seal will crush down and it won't seal anymore. Then you've got to replace this tube, which is a whole nother can of worms. But anyway, that's what I'm going to do here is take this off. There we go. Now we're going to take this and get some real wrapping done. Just keep those coils keep the tension on this free end, and also keep those coils nice and tight. We want as much copper as we can get in this joint. And remember, copper gets harder the more you work it. So we want to try and only work it as little as possible. And for those of you who are really nerding out, remember that copper is the opposite of steel when it comes to heat treating. If you want to anneal copper, you heat it up and cool it really fast, which if this were high carbon steel would make it hard, but for copper it actually makes it soft. All right, so we've got a nice wrap on there. It's not perfect, but for this purpose it'll do just fine. We're going to trim this copper off right about mid-coil. We're going to take our soldering iron, which is just a small electronic soldering iron. It's not going to be big enough to attach to the tube, but it will be big enough to give us a nice tie-in on these coils so they don't come undone. When you get this much copper massed together, it can be really challenging to get enough heat in there to get a good joint. But I think we're getting there. I think that's all we need. All right, we're going to try and get this contraption installed. You do not want to put a wrench on these until you are sure that they are actually threading on correctly. And it might take some effort to push these back into position, but you should be able to bring these ferrules all the way down by hand first. It's going to take some effort, but knowing that you've got good mechanical alignment on these before you start cranking on those fittings is going to save you some heartache. Now, how tight should you make these? My advice is only as tight so that they do not leak. I'm going to go about snug on that one. And the same on this one. I do not want to over torque these because then you will have a permanent leak that you cannot fix. Okay, now we're going to get some tubing on this guy and see what we can see. The tubing I'm using here is a high temperature silicone tubing that I actually use for a lot of powder coat masking, which is really handy if you're doing round parts. All right, we're going to turn on our fans and pumps, see if we have any leaks, make sure we got good water flow. And it looks like we've got water flow. So it's coming in through the top of the head, out the bottom, down through this tube and out. I know it's going the wrong direction. I should be going with convection, but honestly, my system works really well. So there you go. But I got to vent this tank down to 3,000 PSI again, and then we'll run it through and see what we see. We'll see how much this little fix here is able to cool this outlet air temperature or outlet pipe temperature down under load. So first of all, we notice a dramatic difference in the temperature of that wrapped coil around that stainless steel line. But what really stood out here was the sheer difference in volume of moisture that I was able to extract during the vents, especially the second one right here. Now, nothing changed between the first fill and this fill. The relative humidity was exactly the same. It was only a few hours apart, and there was no weather moving through. So that really shows that this did a fantastic job of removing moisture from the system by allowing me to vent it and not putting it in my bottle. So thank you, Schlomo. That was a fantastic idea. I am so stoked and happy to share this idea with other Yong Heng owners. So what did we learn in this episode of the Yong Heng OUT Shop? I personally believe that you can very effectively cool these lines using this technique. So I really want to say thank you to the subscriber/viewer that wrote in and suggested this. It's a really killer idea. It's really inexpensive. I'll put some links to the materials I used from Amazon, and it helps the channel out if you use those links to go ahead and source this stuff. We actually get a little piece of the action from Amazon. Not a lot, believe me. I'm not getting rich off this stuff, but every little bit helps. And I think you could extend this to the other lines as well. And it really, the heat load is nothing compared to the head. It was inconsequential in the overall water temperatures that I showed on my instrumentation. So I think this is a pretty neat idea. Now, one of the things that did come out in the thermal imaging is that the heat that gets generated right down here in this cast iron is really pretty high. And I think this spacing in the air gaps might lend itself to a wrap of that big tubing around there. It's something to experiment with in the future. I think it might pay off to getting some more life out of that piston. I'm not about going super cool with these, but hey, if you can keep those temperatures in the 120 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit range, you're right in the sweet spot for these materials and lubricants, and I think it's going to pay off. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Yong Heng Hot Rod Shop. Thanks for watching. By all means, go check out the Airgun Geeks podcast. You'll have fun, I guarantee it. If you like air guns, you're going to love that podcast. Airgun Geeks podcast, go check them out. They're a wonderful bunch of guys, and all they want to do is help educate the world on air guns and all the cool things you can do. They have great guests on every week. They go and do fun things with air guns. What more could you want? It's great for a little bit of windshield time if you're spending a lot of time in the car or whatever. Thanks again. Have a great week, and remember, be a light in the darkness.